Love that walk-up music. It's great. Thank you. Thanks to the Houston Virtual Choir, too. That's a lot of our folks, isn't it, DeAndre? And every one of those people are singing independently, and then someone who has genius puts it all together and makes it into one mix that is just so beautiful. Thanks to them for doing that. Let me read to us from Joshua today. We're working through Joshua and through Judges in this Heroes in Hard Times series. And today it's Joshua 24. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, and leaders, judges, and officials of Israel. They presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the river Euphrates and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates, led him throughout Canaan, gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you. You took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam. So he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you. Which drove them out before you, also the two Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the river Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. In all the years I've been a Methodist preacher, I have discovered that sometimes how you do as a pastor in a new appointment is all about who you follow. If you're fortunate enough to follow somebody who maybe had a few problems in the congregation, or maybe he or she wasn't happy there, then you at least get the benefit of the doubt for a while just because, well, you're not him or her. But if you follow a preacher whom everybody loved, well, good luck, because some folks may never even give you a chance. On the other hand, I think of a pastor who was leaving his church after many years of serving it, and he was visiting with a woman who was greatly upset over this change. He told her not to worry, that it was very likely that the next pastor would be far better than he had been. She quickly shot back, no, that's what they said the last time. No matter who you are, it's not easy following somebody else as a leader. But just imagine if you were Joshua, our hero in hard times for today. Both Numbers 27, Deuteronomy 3 tell us that Joshua was appointed by God to be the successor to Moses. And right away, that had to have been a bit daunting, don't you think? Moses was Mr. Hebrew, if you will. He was second only to Abraham in the list of most popular Hebrew leaders of all time. Larger than life in the eyes of most. The Prince of Egypt. Looked like Charlton Heston, maybe. He'd been with God. And afterwards, he had to wear a veil, a face mask, not because he was contagious, but because he was still glowing with God's reflected glory. And it blinded people. And though he didn't write the book, he was the one who brought it down from the mountain. Moses was one of a kind, a generational leader. Some might say a man or a woman whom was simply irreplaceable. And yet in the end, everybody is, aren't they? Presidents, politicians, preachers, CEOs. Some people don't know it, but they are. In that respect, we may say that Joshua wasn't a bad choice for a succession plan at all. Like Moses and Caleb, for instance, Joshua had also been born into slavery in Egypt long before. He was the first son of a man named Nun, which meant that had his parents not put blood upon their doorposts, that Joshua too would have been slain on that first Passover night when the angel of death visited Egypt. Joshua likewise had seen the Red Sea open up for the Hebrews to cross over and then close back, drowning the pursuing Egyptian army in the waters. Exodus 32 says he accompanied Moses up to Mount Sinai, staying just a little below the summit, and then he came back down the mountain with Moses when Moses brought the Ten Commandments. And whenever Moses met with God in the tent of meeting, it was Joshua who stood outside guarding it. When the 12 Israelite spies were sent to scope out the promised land of Canaan, Joshua was one of them. 10 of the 12 thought they would never be able to take that land. They reported back that the people there were like giants to them. They were like grasshoppers in comparison. But as you'll remember, it was Joshua and Caleb, whom we spoke of last week, who gave the minority report, who encouraged the Hebrews to move forward. Nobody else agreed. And so by a 10-2 vote, and isn't democracy wonderful? The Israelites ended up in disobedience unto God, spending the next 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Don't you just know that Joshua, having seen the land of milk and honey for himself, kept thinking as they marched time in the Sinai, what a waste of years this is. It's no surprise thus that when the 40-year period of house arrest in the wilderness ended, kind of ultimate stay-at-home order for the Hebrews, that Joshua, who had become a soldier with exceptional skills, became the commanding general of the Israelite troops. Still, what a shock it must have been when God told Moses that Moses would not be going into Canaan. I think it was because God had something even better for Moses at the age of 120. And in turn, Moses summoned Joshua in front of the whole nation, and he said, "Be strong and courageous. You will take this people into the land which was sworn to their ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." That's exactly what Joshua did. What an amazing task that must have been. It's no wonder, in fact, that chapter 1 of this book of Joshua tells us that after the death of Moses, God told Joshua no less than 3 times in the first chapter the very same word: be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. And Joshua did that. Under his leadership, Israel not only entered the land which God had promised long before to Abraham, but they conquered it. They began divided up between themselves, each of the 12 tribes. Caleb, as we saw, wanted the mountain at Hebron. Joshua, perhaps not unsurprisingly, waited and went at the end. Leaders do that. Until the time came at last for Joshua himself to step down and to step away from the leadership post he had served so well. Chapter 24 tells us that Joshua assembled all of the tribes at Shechem for a farewell message. It was a good choice. Shechem was the very place where God had first promised Abraham his descendants would receive the land. It was the place where Jacob had dug a well and built an altar. It was the spot between Mount Abel and Mount Gerizim, you can see them both, where the Israelites had earlier reaffirmed their covenant with God. Shechem was holy ground to the Israelites, where the story of salvation came home, as Jack Beck likes to put it. So it was there that Joshua rehearsed once more all that God had done for them. Facing a whole new normal without either Moses or Joshua, the Israelites needed to know, first of all, that it was God who chose them. Second, that it was God who delivered them, first from famine and then from Egypt. And third, that it was God who had guided them, defeating their enemies, even turning curses like those of Balaam into blessings instead. And after pointing out that God had given them a land on which they had not toiled, cities they did not build, vineyards and olive groves which they had not planted, Joshua then laid out a very simple challenge before his people. Fear the Lord and choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, there's something in what Joshua said that So we practice and we practice, but we still have to do things on the fly. There's an eternal truth here, which is that at some point, every one of us have to choose whom to serve. It's like that old rusty folk singer Bob Dylan once put it. You may remember this song. You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You may like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Maybe a construction worker working on a home. May be living in a mansion. You might live in a dome. You may own guns, and you may even own tanks. You may be somebody's landlord. You may even own banks. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Now, it may be the devil. It may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And it's true. Everybody serves somebody. But the good news is you can freely choose to serve God if you want to, if you decide to. Serving the Lord is always a matter of choice. If serving God seems undesirable to you, well, again, Joshua said, it's your choice. God never forces anyone to love him. He doesn't compel any of us to try and please him. He doesn't make us put him first. He doesn't try to trick us or manipulate us into having us serve him. He leaves it up to us as to how we respond to him. But this much I'm fairly certain of. It's only when we serve God and we serve others that we actually find our joy in life. That's been one of the great things to come out of this strange season that we've all been in, living in. Despite all the restrictions and all the requirements, this church, and we've got 300 of you out here, just your pictures. This church has continued to find ways to serve other people. Some of our folks have made hundreds of masks to give away. These are our not-so-old so-and-sos doing these. Others of you have filled up our bins with food for those who are hungry, or you've given it out in our food programs, or you've kept our community garden going, or you've planted a victory garden of your own. Some of you have sent funds to help us to help pay rents and mortgages for those who have no income coming in right now. Because so many have kept right on giving, we've been able to channel it on to those who are even less fortunate than us right here. Our friends in Buliki with Dr. Ronnie, Christians in Bethlehem, others all around the world. And some of you have responded on the front lines. Nurses, doctors, hospital staffers, first responders. I think in this respect of something Dan reminded us of a few weeks ago that Fred Rogers once said. Recalling advice he received in his youth, Fred said that when he was a boy, he would see scary things in the news. His mother would tell him, look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping. What a joy that so many within this congregation have been some of those people. There's even scientific evidence that serving others is one of the best anti-anxiety medications out there. Apparently, our bodies and minds both benefit in a variety of ways when we help other people. The studies have shown that serving others lowers the stress hormone cortisol. Serving God is not just good advice, it's good medicine. But again, we do have to decide whom to serve, don't we? I think of a young boy who wanted to be an usher at a wedding. He was really far too young for that, but he just insisted. So his father sat down with him and he said, now this is what you do. When people come in, you ask if they're a friend of the bride or a friend of the groom so you can know where to seat them. So when the first woman walked in the door, he very, very sweetly put his arm out and he said, ma'am, whose side are you on? Joshua likewise gave the Israelites some pretty clear options. He told them they could go right on worshiping all the false idols, the so-called gods which their ancestors had served long before Abraham was even called by God, all the old ways of doing things. It's easy to worship those, isn't it? Harken back to the good old days. Even upon remembering that they weren't actually all that good sometimes. Or, Joshua said, you can serve the new gods of the neighbors, the Amorites. Make no mistake, the allure of the culture around us is always an enormous one. We all want to fit in and be one of the cool kids, don't we? To be in the know, to go along with the crowd. Or, Joshua said, you can throw away those idols and walk away from the pressure to conform and be like everybody else, and instead serve the Lord this morning. Because Joshua reminded his fellow Israelites, the amazing truth is that God has just been waiting for you and me to come to him all along. Some time ago, I came across a story of a woman who was struggling to reestablish a relationship with her father. When she was a child, the two of them were as close as they could be. And the time she knew it best was at family reunions when, after the big meal, they would move all the furniture to the side, they would crank up the music, and they would start playing polka records. Eventually, somebody would put on Beer Barrel Polka. And her father would always come over to her with outstretched hands and say, come on, girl, let's roll those blues away. When that girl became a teenager, she started to despise the silliness of those family get-togethers. And one day, for no particular reason other than that she was an adolescent, when that special song began to play and her father walked over to him, she glared at him with an icy indifference and she muttered under her breath, "Just leave me alone." Taken aback, her dad turned away. He never invaded her privacy again. He danced with her mother, he danced with her sisters, not with her. When she came home from a date, she'd find him waiting up, sitting in the old chair with an open book in his lap, half asleep. "What are you doing up?" she'd say. "Why don't you just go to bed?" He would look at her and whisper, "I was just waiting for you, that's all. Just waiting for you." When she finally graduated from high school, she was ready to leave that house. And the relationship between her and her father became even more distant and formal, until one day she began to miss what she and her dad once had enjoyed. She wasn't sure how to bridge that gap. It had grown so large. But then she came home one weekend. They had a family meal, and somebody put on the Beer Barrel Polka. Her father walked across the room. She went to him with outstretched hands and she said, "Daddy, I believe this is our dance." He looked at her and he smiled and he said simply, "I've been waiting for you, just waiting for you." You suppose that's what Joshua, our hero, was trying to tell those Israelites in his farewell message to them that day at the Shechem Valley? That our God has just been waiting for us to remember, waiting for us to recommit to Him, waiting for us to rejoice in Him and in His love, even in the midst of all this craziness. Yeah, it's a strange, strange time. We seem to be moving forward. We still have no idea how this is all going to turn out in the end. The world continues to ebb and to flow, collapsing one day, lurching forward the next. The counts go up and the counts go down. The masks go on and the masks come off. And sadly enough, some have walked away from their faith. But many more have found a new one. But we still have choices to make. Choose to be kind. Choose to do the right thing. Choose to keep the faith. Choose to reach out and be reconciled, not just to God, but to everybody else too. Facing hard times? Here again, what that successor to Moses, Joshua, said long ago. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Any other takers out there this morning? The choice is ours. The Father has just been waiting for us. Amen.